and been in Texas since 1995. Purpose of today is to talk to you about pointillism. People are asking, how did you get involved with that? Everybody knows pointillism from George Surratt's Sunday in the Park with George, I think is the name of it. And his thing was that you had dots of color that blended together at certain distances. If you got within that scope of distance, you didn't see the picture. I studied that when I was in college. My senior year of college, I found out I was only 9 credit hours I needed to graduate from college. Well, that's kind of good, except I wasn't a full-time student anymore at that point, which means I lost my job as a resident advisor, which paid for my room and board, and I would have lost my student deferment. So I went to the head of the college that I attended at University of Cincinnati, DAA, and I spoke with the dean there, and he said, you know, you're going to graduate as a teacher. Come up with a lesson plan. Come up with a program. I'll give you the 3 hours. We'll call it independent study. Okay. Gee, I like to play around with dots. I'd like to see what's going to happen with that. So I wrote a curriculum, and I had to give reports to him on occasion. And I have actually 2 of the very first ones that I did in dots. This is the first one. It's of a tree, at which point I was basically using dots as a filler. You'll see that there's, let me just pass this around, that's probably easiest to do with that. So then I thought, well, let me play around with it a little bit more. One of the other pictures that I had was one I did with this, where I suddenly started to realize you could do more grading. I'd always been a black and white guy as far as illustrations, but I always liked the contrast that black and white have. And I just transposed that into dots. I got an A in the course. The teacher was, the instructor was very, very rough, but I pulled through. And ended up being a full-time student, got my degree and everything, started teaching. I taught in Cincinnati's inner city school for the first 7 years of my career. I taught middle school. Cincinnati at that time was segregated. You had schools that were black and you had schools that were white, and the two shall not meet. And so I was in one of the true inner city schools and thought nothing of it, a lot of fun. Second year of teaching, I get a call one night in my apartment, and this guy says, "Is this John Rodak?" I said, "Yes, it is." He goes, "John, this is Kenny Anderson." And I recognized the voice, the guy that I taught with, that's a friend to me this day. He says, I said, "Mike, this is incredible." I says, "I got things to do, stop screwing around." Hung up the phone. A minute later, phone rings again. And this guy says, "John?" I said, "Yes, Mike, I told you stop screwing around, I got things to do." Hung it up. A minute later, the phone rings again. I go, "Hello," and he goes, "John, don't hang up. This is not Mike. I don't know who Mike is. This is Kenny Anderson. You know who Kenny Anderson is?" I said, "Yeah, you're the new quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals." He said, "Yeah, I'd like to commission you to do a picture for me for my parents. I want to thank them for all the time that they spent with me in college." So I don't know how well you can see that one, but I'll pass this around too. Now the thing about this picture is that that's 6 feet tall, and it's in dots.
Wow. Dot, dot, dot.
Woo, wait.
At that time, pens and inks were not up to the quality that they are now. You had, if you remember, the flare pens. They were black with the white tip, and they had like the very vinyl type tips to them. Well, when you're doing dots, it's this that you're doing. And if you don't monitor yourself correctly, pretty soon instead of getting a dot, you get a smudge because that vinyl tip is flattened out. Well, that was done all in vinyl pens, black and whites. And I liked it. He loved it. I mean, again, it was a gift to his parents, thanking them for all the time they put into him to develop his career. He had me over to his house, met his family, fed me dinner, and for a number of years afterwards, whenever I was in the Cincinnati airport and he was there, I would hear somebody yell, John Rodak. And I turn, and everybody would look around and they go, oh, that's Kenny Anderson. Who's he yelling at? But he would come up, speak, how you doing? How's this? Da-da. My folks still love that picture, etc. So, kind of put the dots away. I was doing teaching full-time. I had my own commercial design studio where I was doing advertising for people. I was laying out brochures. I was illustrating for magazines. The closest I got to dots was I was using a technique called zipatone, which comes in a sheet. And you would, with the X-Acto blade, trim off the size that you needed. You'd peel it off, put it in the area, trim it away, and that gave you the dot effect. Late 1990s in Ohio, there was a big movement where people, second, third, fourth generations, were selling family farms. People were buying them to, of course, develop them into housing areas, and other people were buying it to get out of the city. The people that were buying it to get out of the city suddenly went to their local city councils and said, you know, I just bought this farm and I don't like the smell of the cows over here and I don't like the smell of the pigs from that neighbor over there. I want an ordinance that says you've got to stop that smell. Seriously. I come from a family of farmers. My dad was one of 9 children. My grandfather was still alive. He was operating a dairy farm. I had 2 uncles on the same street that had dairy farms. 2 of my cousins owned farms on that street. The one uncle who was my favorite uncle in the world, he was my godfather. He and me and my dad were sitting around one time in the late 1990s, and they were telling me about this. And I said, you know, I'm a teacher. What happens if we put together a program and we would ship it around the state to educate people about farms? I said, I can do drawings of the farms. I can, give lectures about it. Wrote up a program, sent it to the governor of Ohio. Letter comes back, John, great idea. Contact this person. I send it to that person. Comes back, John, great idea. Send it to this person. So after about 4 or 5 times of that, I figured the heck with it. I started contacting historical societies, libraries, colleges, universities, and said, I've got this program. It's going to be ready to go in 2002. Here's what it is. Are you interested? And suddenly I get people, yeah. And I'm going, geez, now I got to do some pictures. So I started doing the barns. And I would do the barns the way they were. Didn't try to fancy it up, didn't try to clean it up. If there was something falling down, if there was a hole in the roof, if the door was a side of it, if there were weeds all over it, that's the way I drew it. And I did it in straight black and white. I thought, that's kind of good, but it doesn't catch your eye. So I started dots. Let me try that again. So by that time, they had developed the pens that, the Uniball pens, metal tips, and they didn't smush. They could put a hole in your paper if you did it too long. But I started doing the barns in dots, which meant my son and I would go up during the summers to visit my dad, and we would travel around roads looking for the barns. Friends would call me up, hey, when you come up, go to this road. There's this really cool barn. My brother-in-law, who would like to travel, there's a mail pouch barn over on this street. Go ahead and do that. And at that time, you had 35 millimeter cameras. You didn't have digital like you do now. So I would take 6-8 rolls of film in a day, drop it off at the local place to get it developed, and come back the next day. Yeah, that looks kind of good. No, I didn't catch the essence there. I need to go back and do that. That's what I did for about 2 years, just collecting pictures of barns and working from that. One interesting side story on that is there was a map that my dad pulled up. And every day that we would go out to the barns, he would tell me, indicate where you're going. So, after about a couple of times of this going on, I turned to my dad and I says, I'm an adult. I got I'm raising a child. I'm gainfully employed. I'm smart. Why do you need to know where I'm going every day? He goes, I need to know where you're at because I worry about you. He says, you're my son. I will always worry about you. Okay, I still have that map. So that's when I started doing barns. But that's when I started really with the dots. And you guys are artists, so you know what it is when you get in one of those zones. Sometimes everything flows real easily. Sometimes it's a struggle. My personal thing about doing the pictures in dots, and I brought some of the samples in for you to see, is that on my drawing board, I have a blank sheet of paper. I usually work on paper that's 14 by 17 size, so everything fits eventually in a 16 by 20 frame. So I never exceed my boundary where, oh my God, it's not going to fit in a 16 by 20 frame. I use a Strathmore number 400 white paper because it holds the ink really nicely. It doesn't, you don't put the dot in, and the dot kind of smears on you like that. And the kind of pens I use now are these Technica pens. Okay, they come in various sizes, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. So if I want a dark dot, I can use an 8 if I don't want to sit there and add more dots to get a dark area. The best ones that I like using on that are like the 3 and the 4. This picture here, I broke tradition on. And this one, what I did was, I did all the dark areas first in an 8. And then went back and started putting the graded shadings in with a 4. Just to try something different to see how well that worked like that. As opposed to just using one pen for the entire area through the whole picture. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So when you say 4 to 8, are you talking about the tone of the ink?
You're talking about the size of the tip.
Okay, so that's in millimeters, I guess, is that what the measurement is?
You know, that the MM and the CM, and it's just, number 4 works really well. 3 works well also. And number 8, if I want that nice big black dot, that's what I pull.
Right.
So,
Do you start with an outline, or
No.
do you just start dotting?
I have paper on my desk, and I have pictures that I work from. So any of the pictures that you see are based on photographs that we've taken. Someone made the comment to me earlier, you must travel. Yeah, my wife is from Taiwan, okay, and she still has family. We still have family in mainland China, but we've gone to Taiwan several times. A number of pictures come from that time. Some pictures have come from China. That one came from Angkor Wat, our last trip before COVID. The picture that you see of that one is marked Old Shanghai. That is the backside of Shanghai. Shanghai, everybody sees all the modern things. We got took a little side trip, and that's what it looks like in the back streets. Those are the best ones to go through. You'll see the picture of the guardian angel, and you'll see this one called Enraptured. Obviously, those are statues that you find in cemeteries. And that was an interesting point between us when I said, we're going to travel to this place, and they've got 3 cemeteries in town. We're going to go to the cemetery. I said, they got great statues. So first it was, no, she would sit in the car outside of the cemetery, and I would walk around the cemetery. And then finally got to the point where she would go into the cemetery with me in the car. And then finally she'd drop me off, and she'd drive to the other end and wait for me as I made my way through the cemetery. But there were just some great statues, and there's some great effects. And when you're with a digital camera nowadays, you can take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pictures, try and get the lights different, etc., so that when you go to sit down and work, you work.
So you have a photograph of what you're going to do,
Yes.
and you have a plain piece of paper.
Plain piece of paper.
How are you getting the picture onto your paper? Are you using
That's a really good question. My personal phobia about that is that when I can see that picture that I want to draw on that paper, then I sit down and start.
when you see it?
When I can visualize that picture, what it's going to look like on the paper, that's when I sit down.
So you don't use a machine to
No.
put it on there?
No.
You don't have any?
No.
A pencil line drawing,
No.
nothing underneath it?
No.
Nothing? You just start?
Just start.
How often do you mess up? You have to start over?
Well, the only time I think I messed up 2 pictures. I wasn't happy with the way the dots were coming out. And there were 2 that I had to throw away because, again, my personal phobia is when the ink runs out and I'm done with the picture, throw the picture away because I don't want to. Yeah, and I know it's a strange thing. It's a strange thing, but that's what I did. And that's why these are so great, because you can see when you're running out of ink.
Is that because each ink pen is a little different, even though they come from the same package?
Yeah, that's a good explanation. I'll go with that one. That basically is the thinking behind it. Yeah, it's just if you start with something, you should be able to finish with something. But that has only happened a couple times. But yeah, it's basically a blank sheet of paper, and I've got to see it on that paper before I sit down. And there is no special place to start. You don't start at the corner, you don't start at the bottom, you don't start in the middle, just where you feel like starting. And I know when I did this one, it was starting with this part in the middle, just the shadow parts of it. There are times where you just kind of get lost in it. When I first started doing it with the barns, my son would go to bed about 9:30. At that time, in 1999, 2000, you had AMC, Turner Network, that would have movies on late at night. Okay, he would go to bed, I'd sit down at the drawing board, turn the movie on, and start. Coffee was going, and maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, I would look up and it was like, oh, you better grab a couple hours sleep, I gotta get up to teach in the morning. And you just get in those kind of zones. Now, instead of it taking like 40 hours, like the first 18 barn pictures did, now it's about 25, 30 hours, because it's more precise. I mean, you really have concentrated on it, you've developed the focus on it, you know how much coffee to drink, you know when to get up to take your break from it and come back to things. Other questions? My dear?
I say sometimes it's not just from one picture.
No, it's, you've got a couple, 2 or 3 pictures there because you're trying to get the different shadows. Gee, it looks like it here, but when I look at this one, it's a little bit different that way. For example, I have on my drawing board that I will start tomorrow, is my wife plays table tennis. She's very, very good at it, even though she'll sit there and know I'm not. She and her partner, 3 years ago, won the national gold for the National Table Tennis Tournament in Albuquerque. When they had the same tournament in Fort Lauderdale last month, she and her partner won again, against all odds.
Very good.
So her partner and her husband have become pretty good friends. And they asked me to do a picture of them. And that's one of the things that she's referring to. We took several pictures of them. Okay, he looks good in that one. I don't like that angle of her. She looks good in that one, but I don't like the angle of him. This one has got really good shading on her, but not on him. That's what you're working for. So I saw it. Last night I saw it on the paper. I went, okay, I'm good to go on it.
Do you work on a flat table, or is your table slanted?
My table is slanted. One thing I try to tell my students is that if I can tell if you're right-handed or left-handed. If you're left-handed, your picture is going off this way a little bit. If you're right-handed, your picture is going off this way a little bit. And, oh no, that's not it. Look at your picture and they go, oh yeah, you're right. How do you do that? I said, well, you keep that in mind that may happen, but you try to work at an elevation so you've got that flat surface that you're looking at, not at that distorted angle.
One other question.
I'll take as many questions. Go ahead.
As a fellow artist, when does your neck start killing you and you're all stuck? Do you get froze?
That used to happen when I first started. And like I
Not
say,
anymore?
now maybe I'll do 45 minutes to an hour and a half at the drawing board doing that, and then you get up and you take a break. I usually have a pot of coffee going all day, correct?
How about your hand cramping?
No, I don't have that problem.
Okay.
I've been blessed with the fact that my hand doesn't cramp.